Sustain267.
Welcome to this episode of Sustain267 Podcast, where we talk about climate change, sustainability, and the environment in Africa. I am your host, Pato Kelesitse.
Welcome to ladies and gentlemen, please short form that you remain seated until the airplane has come to stop it.
We are in Mozambique. In the next few episodes, we continue to look into the disinformation that fossil fuels will develop Africa and explore the manifestation and characteristics of this message in Mozambique. The journey of this series, Disinformation, Fossil Fuels and Development, began in Media Village in Botswana. If you missed the previous 4 episodes that focused on Botswana, be sure to go back to listen and gain insight into the disinformation strategies at play there, who's behind these narratives, what they have achieved, and who the winners and losers are in this battle. In the upcoming episodes, however, we turn our attention to Mozambique, focusing on the disinformation campaign surrounding development and the extraction of liquefied natural gas, or LNG. The information and research done for this episode was supported by investigative journalist and former Bertha Foundation Fellow from Greece, Sotiris Sideris. Our spotlight is on Mozambique LNG project, which is led by Total Energies. This project operates in the northern region of Mozambique, a country which is currently embroiled in political unrest following the 2024 presidential elections. Frelimo, the party in power since the country gained its independence 49 years ago, was declared the victor amidst allegations of election rigging and the recent assassination of 2 leaders from the main opposition party. This political turmoil only intensifies the violence already plaguing the Cabo Delgado province, the location of the Mozambique LNG project. Insurgents there have been relentlessly attacking villages and towns, leading to kidnappings, widespread displacement, and the tragic deaths of thousands of people. In this first Mozambique-focused episode, we started out in Maputo, where I was invited to the 8th Maputo workshop on corporate impunity and human rights, hosted by Justica Ambiental, or JA. The workshop is a space filled with music, storytelling, hugs, and dancing. It's a space for grassroots communities, civil society organizations, activists, academics, lawyers, and government representatives to connect, to discuss, and to learn from each other about the complex and obscure ways through which transnational corporations have managed to capture Mozambique's democratic structures and processes with an emphasis on climate change and environmental justice. The workshop was an opportunity for me to meet with people from villages and towns in the Cabo Delgado district who have been affected by the LNG Fossil Fuels for Development project, who I unfortunately could not travel to meet in their homes due to the high security risk. The closest I did get was Pemba, the capital city of Cabo Delgado, where I met and connected with internally displaced people from Palma and Macomia, the villages affected by the LNG project and the violence by the insurgents. But first, let's take a step back and understand why Mozambique, specifically Cabo Delgado province and Total Energies, are relevant in our Disinformation, Fossil Fuels and Development series. In 2010, natural gas reserves were discovered off the coast of Cabo Delgado province in northern Mozambique. Several transnational corporations have since signed agreements to purchase and exploit this gas, namely Anadarko, which was then bought out by Total in 2019, Exxon, Eni, BP, and Shell, the usual suspects. Public and private financiers like the export credit agencies of South Africa, Japan, China, Italy, and Netherlands. Cabo Delgado is home to Africa's 3 largest liquefied natural gas projects: the Mozambique LNG project, led by Total, formerly Anadarko, which is in construction phase; Coral FLNG project, which is led by Eni and ExxonMobil, which is operational; and Rovuma LNG project, led by ExxonMobil, Eni, and CNPC, which is at pre-construction phase. Led by a global energy company, Total Energies, the Mozambique liquefied natural gas project was the first major on-share LNG project in the country. Located on the Afungi Peninsula of Cabo Delgado, the project faced significant challenges, including the displacement of people in over 7,000 hectares of land. This, according to Total Energies reports of community land, resettlement issues, and disruption of the fishing economy. The Mozambique LNG project was acquired from Anadarko by Total Energies in 2019 as part of the deal when American Occidental Petroleum took over Anadarko. Imagine being part of a community whose land stretches back generations, land that supports your family, holds your history, and sustains your culture, only to see it handed over to a global corporation with the promise of development. What happens when that development disrupts rather than uplifts? For many in Cabo Delgado, this is not just a loss of land, but a loss of identity and livelihood. Government and private entities propagated a narrative that fossil fuel extraction through projects such as Mozambique LNG Initiative will bring development to the region. The hope, shared publicly by the government, is that the LNG projects will result in economic benefits from revenues collected by the government that will be used to provide public goods and services and develop infrastructure. The government and private entities have framed fossil fuel extraction projects, like the Mozambique LNG Initiative, as engines of regional development. The government has publicly promoted the idea that revenue from these LNG projects would fund essential public services, infrastructure, and other developments that would improve the quality of life of Mozambicans. However, these projected revenue streams are not guaranteed. With the insurgency continuing to threaten the region, the likelihood of these incomes materializing and the development they're supposed to support becomes even more uncertain. It's easy to make promises of development when the potential returns look astronomical. But it's much harder to fulfill these promises when conflict and insecurity undermine stability. As it turns out, however, community members needed to be more informed about the true benefits of having a liquefied natural gas mine in their backyard. On the other hand, the promise of development masked the project's potential negative impacts, such as forced resettlements and environmental degradation. Based on GDP per capita, Mozambique has constantly been ranked one of the poorest and least developed countries, ranking among the 10 poorest nations globally, yet one of the most heavily indebted countries in the world, despite its wealth in raw materials and natural resources. One of the items that served as evidence for me for this was the number of international NGOs and UN agencies whose offices I rode past on the motorbike tour in Bemba. According to the International NGO Safety Organization, there are at least 300 of these offices in Mozambique. Over half of the population, of about 35 million people, still live in poverty, with rural households particularly vulnerable to weather-related hazards. Despite the tremendous economic potential, the business environment remains challenging due to corruption, which Transparency International, using the Corruption Perceptions Index, ranked at 145 of 180 countries in 2023. Given the challenges Mozambique has faced in its development efforts, politicians and business leaders have positioned the LNG projects as the ultimate solution to the country's development.
De que, de facto, os países como Moçambique têm grande desafio em, por lado, fazer entender, portanto, aos parceiros, vários parceiros, portanto, a nível internacional, de que, de facto, a implementação desses projetos com base no gás natural. Eu, por acaso, em Moçambique, eu vou falar do gás natural, que é, portanto, o combustível fóssil mais amigável, menos poluente, joga não só um papel a nível de estabilizar a procura a nível mundial, mas também vai trazer receitas para o Estado que vão ajudar, portanto, a que países como Moçambique possam fazer investimentos em infraestruturas que certamente vão mudar a face do país. E tem que haver uma abordagem mais pragmática por parte de todos os países, tanto por parte de países como Moçambique, como de outros países africanos, bem como dos países que também, de alguma forma, estão na vanguarda, estão na dianteira de portanto, conduzir, portanto, essa transição energética para a energia mais verde, no sentido dos países poderem entender que, de facto, a possibilidade de um país, por exemplo, europeu, poder, portanto, fazer essa transição, porque ela tem infraestruturas, tem recursos, tem recursos financeiros para o poder fazer, é diferente da situação de países em desenvolvimento como os países africanos. E que talvez seja bom e necessário considerar-se uma plataforma que permita que os objetivos sejam alcançados a longo prazo, mas que sejam feitos, portanto, se calhar, não à mesma velocidade para os países desenvolvidos e para os países em via de desenvolvimento. Eu creio que essa seria, portanto.
And painting anyone who's against the fossil fuels for development projects as villains driven by the West and anti-development, as expressed here by NJ Ayuk, the chairperson of Africa Energy Chamber.
So that pressure from outside NGOs that are saying climate change is too big of a risk, therefore you shouldn't tap into the energy resources that are there in Africa. It's real then that they are thwarting investment and the exploration of these resources.
It is real. There has never been a time when we have seen so much pressure on Africa by NGOs. In South Africa today, you can't even shoot seismic because Western NGOs are filing lawsuits and they are blocking multinational corporations from even exploring outside South Africa, the Orange Basin in South Africa. In East Africa, in Uganda, there is the East African crude oil pipeline. That pipeline has been under massive attack from financing, from funding, and everything that is being produced by Total Energies to ensure that that pipeline doesn't get, say, 200,000 barrels of oil production. It's going to be Armageddon. It's going to be the end of the world. That's just 1.8% of U.S. production. That makes no sense. Our Mozambique, a country that's very poor, heavily dependent on aid, NGOs have done everything to block financing from going into Mozambique LNG or other projects there. And that is really hurting our potential to grow. And across Africa, you continue seeing that. The only options that the NGOs offer is that the wealthy nations are going to give us aid. I don't think Africa's future is going to be built and reliant on Africans begging for aid all the time. We should be let alone to do for ourselves what we expect our very good benevolent NGOs to come down here and do for us. So we need to access markets. We need to get NGOs to stay out of the way and let us build with those that really want to focus on how to build energy for people.
The following excerpts from public speeches, as well as interviews with community members, will show how disinformation was spread to gain local support for the mining project. Despite promises of economic development, most of the profits from the LNG projects that have been developed are allocated elsewhere, leaving the communities with nothing but dire social, health, security, and environmental burdens. These messages are spread by government through public addresses in villages, cities, and global platforms like the United Nations and other multilateral platforms. Locally, they took advantage of systems that people already trusted or felt powerless against. Like people from this community who are internally displaced people from Musima, Palma, and Makumia, who have now settled in Pemba, who you'll get to know a little better in episode 2 when we look at power and politics.
So, indeed, we had this promise. We are delighted that we could, for example, have a better future, like construct something. And the people who made this promise was the government with the multinational. And how this was done, the government is the one who did open the doors, that the multinational could come and tell us what they were going to offer us. They could be on the stage in a rally where they could be together, and the government could say, this is this company, this is Total, and Total will construct walls for you, schools, will give you employment, and so on. But mainly our father is the government. So the government is the one who was telling us what the multinational, all those white guys were going to do for us.
Additionally, even though the gas industry promotes natural gas as green and at a stretch calling it clean, it's not true. Gas extraction projects in Cabo Delgado will result in a huge release of greenhouse gas emissions, especially methane, which could increase the whole of Mozambique's greenhouse gas emissions by 14%. These contradictions from international and local community messaging also highlight the different tactics used to advance this message. Total Energies repeatedly highlighted cooking with gas as clean cooking, with the implication that gas is clean and environmentally friendly. The disinformation is not just about spreading a false hope. It's about manipulating hope and trust, and in doing so, exploiting communities who deserve much better. Total Energies has also invested a significant amount of resources into public relations and uplifting its name as a driver of development across the African continent, and made significant efforts to embed its image as synonymous with being African and for Africa, where the messaging subtly reinforces Total's energy to claim to both support Africa's development and unity. There's a campaign, Kick Total Out of AFCON campaign, which has done great work towards this and has a hilarious parody as an ad. You'll find the link in the episode notes.
Football is central to Africa, and Africa is central to the story of Total. It is essential to everything we hope to accomplish. With over 80 years on the continent of Africa, in 44 countries and across all our business lines, we are proud to be the leading energy provider here. In 2015 alone, we produced 247 million barrels of oil equivalent.
The public relations campaign extends to positioning themselves as having ambitions of green energy, but slowed down by having to meet the global demands for fossil fuel energy. I mean, they're only giving the people what they want. I mean, they're only a company worth over $100 billion. How can they possibly not? The impacts of the disinformation campaign aimed at the people of Mozambique are many. The community was told that the Mozambique LNG project would improve their economic conditions, but the reality was utterly different. The disinformation campaign, promoted by government and corporate entities, left populations vulnerable to displacement without adequate compensation or job creation as promised. And it worsened security risks due to the increase in insurgent activity since the beginning of the project. This can't be directly tied to the LNG project because there was already tension that existed before the LNG work. But the LNG work can be viewed as a contributing factor due to the inequalities that then became more evident. The timeline also suggests a correlation, which does not guarantee causation. In October 2017, the insurgency started, 5 months after the investment decision by Coral South LNG. And then one of the major attacks, which happened in Palma, then happened in March of 2021, hours after Total Energies announced plans to resume work at Afungi Park. With stuff like Total Energies creating little nirvanas in their faces and high inflation because people were spending in dollars and exacerbating socio-economic challenges that can be tied to the investment in and the operationalization of the projects, it's no wonder. Research by Observatorio de Medio Rural notes additional factors related to the extractive industry investment that have increased social tensions, such as state prioritizing investors, pressure on communities to accept unfair outcomes, low transparency, and increased corruption. High illiteracy rates have also contributed to most of the jobs going to foreign workers. People who have lost both homes, but also the areas they depend on for their livelihoods. Already, 557 families have been forcefully relocated and more will be moved in the future. This, according to the Total Energy website. Fishing communities who have lived 50 meters from the sea for generations have also been moved 10 kilometers inland and, without fishing, have lost their income. In these villages, the gas industry has further forced hundreds of families from their rural communities out of their homes and away from their farmland and fishing grounds to build the onshore support facilities of the Afungi LNG Park for use by Mozambique LNG, Coral LNG, and Rovuma LNG projects. Here's a conversation I had with Burinana Adinand Masood, an elderly gentleman from the fishing and farming community of Milamba in the coastal Palma, who was relocated with his family of 2 wives, 10 children, and his grandchildren. He shares his experience with the Gas for Development project, all the way from when it was still owned by Adanko to now under Total Energies.
The first company was an Adarco. When they arrived, they said that they wanted to do some research and prospection in the sea. They made a meeting to inform communities that they would first make a research, and after the results they would say something, because in that time they were not sure if there is oil and gas in that area. And then they came to inform us that they found out a good amount of oil and gas in Rovuma Basin. They said that they would need a portion of land to build the factory of refination of the oil.
Did they then reach an agreement with the company?
Yes, we could. In that time, we agreed with them.
Why did you agree to the resettlement?
We didn't accept exactly, but we only saw that we couldn't get any good result for us with the resistance.
So, even though you did want to resist but felt you couldn't, what did the company tell you, or did they make you any promises about if you agreed to relocate that made you more agreeable to relocating?
What exactly happened in that time is that we were really resisting because we didn't want resettlement. But what happened is that time that they created a strategy. When they suggested us to organize our resistance, they said that we had to organize in. They created the committees, and we saw that it was better for us to accept the resettlement, because in that time, after the creation of the committees, the community just get divided, because we had a group saying no to resettlement and other group were saying yes, and the group saying yes were the majority of our communities. That was the strategy to divide us. They did the strategy. They created the committee. It seems like a good idea, because in this committee they started to they gather all the traditional leaders with the influential leaders and people who could take the message of the whole community to them. And they started to negotiate directly with this committee. But do you know what came out? This committee started to receive a salary monthly. And when the committee started to receive the salaries, things started to change. Community gets divided.
Why did the majority agree?
The majority accepted because they made some promise.
Promessas.
What were the promises?
Key promises: good life,
Boa casa condigna,
good houses,
energia,
electricity,
escola,
schools,
água
water,
e boa vida.
and good life.
Condições de trabalho.
And conditions for work, access to employ, acesso a emprego, né?
Exatamente.
Okay.
Who is the person who made these promises?
Era a empresa.
The company,
Okay.
Junto com o governo.
in partnership with the government.
Of them.
Nós, a maioria,
A small group of people knew that own the land was better than own a house. That's why we were denying. But as the other group, the bigger group, were willing to have the good life they promised, we handed to lose our strength and we leave the things.
But why didn't they suspect that the company could be lying to them?
We already suspect that they were lying, and also the civil society organizations were also calling us for awareness, telling us that this could be a trap for you.
Até eles ensinaram-nos.
So in that time, what we decided with the support of civil society is that we should sign a memo, with the company.
Where did you relocate to and what did you find there?
A empresa
People from Milamba, they choose to live in Namba, but people from Kitupu choose to live Kitunda.
What did they find there? Did they find a better life like they were promised? Do they feel like they were living a life that's more developed compared to where they were before?
nós lá.
We didn't find a good life. Our previous life was better. We are now living in Kitunda, in one is an area where not everything is good as we had before.
Nós tínhamos boa vida em Milão.
We had a good life in Milamba.
Tínhamos terra vasta para podermos fazer agricultura.
We had a huge amount of land to
A nossa
make agriculture.
Era conforme como alguém programava, que é nessas horas, porque estávamos próximo das águas.
We could planificate our activities because we were fishermen, so we were really close to the sea, and we could decide at what time I want to go and fish.
Para sair de Kitunda para a praia, é preciso sair de Machibom.
For you to go from Kitunda to the beach, you have to take a bus,
E tem horário.
and you have a
Esta
schedule.
do regresso.
You have a schedule to leave and to come back.
Por isso, a vida está mais difícil.
So that's why the life is more difficult now.
Agora, temos outro processo. Deixa. A energia é bom para todos, mas a energia é pagável.
Yeah,
Nós temos idade desta natureza e os nossos rendimentos morreram. Para conseguir comprar energia é um problema.
Yeah.
Para pagar água é um problema.
So there is another process in there, because they say that electricity, it's a good thing for everyone. But don't forget that we lost all our means of subsistence, all our means of all the ways that we had to have some money, and electricity you have to pay.
So where are they getting the money for? Are they getting anything from the mines? Have they gotten jobs at the mine?
Nós não temos emprego.
Yeah, no, we are just finding ways of survival because we don't have access to employees in the company. Everyone now are just trying to live the way he could. That's why it's normal for a family to stay a month without electricity, because we don't find money every day to pay for it.
Mesmo as promessas feitas de que todos teriam casa, há pessoas que até hoje ainda não têm casa.
Even the promise that they did that everyone could could be allocated a house, they didn't did that, because some people still waiting to receive houses.
Há pessoas que até hoje ainda
After
não
how many
têm.
years?
People doesn't receive the house because what happened is that they took the chance, because in that time one attack occurred in that area. one attack of the insurgency, because insurgency started in 2017, don't forget. So in that time, in 2019, that community in February had an attack. So people left, and the company took the chance to occupy. So since that time, 2019, 2020, people are still waiting to have houses.
And in the meantime, where are they?
As pessoas.
As pessoas estavam na Vila Pau.
In that time, now people are living in Palma village, because after the attack, they ran to live with relatives.
And then when they moved the family and when they moved the community, did they tell them what the impact would be on the environment?
Yeah. Eles tinham dito, como segundo eu disse, de que haviam boas promessas.
They told us that there were good promises in that time.
Promessa era primeiro de casa.
The first promise was the house.
Dentro da casa seria apetrechada.
And the house would be
Olha, as nossas casas até
would
agora,
have some mobiles there, like beds
tivemos uma esteira de caniço, sem cama, esteira de caniço, sem cama.
And we received just I don't know the name of esteira de caniço.
It's okay, you can try to describe it.
Enquanto que a promessa, em toda a casa teríamos camas com colchões.
Yeah, they promised beds, but beds and other furniture, but it didn't happen exactly. What we received was only it's not a mattress, that it's, you see those mattresses of yoga,
yes,
but with traditional, yeah.
Teríamos a cesta básica.
They promised that they would give us
longa duração. E agora não está acontecendo.
They say that they would give basic food for long durations, like with no hands. They would give food for them to feed for all time, but it wasn't true. All time, but it wasn't true. Water will be for free, but they are charging for water now.
As pessoas agora recorrem aos rios, porque não conseguem pagar a taxa.
And now people need to go to rivers because they cannot afford to pay the water taxes.
And is the water in the rivers good?
Yeah, água no rio é boa.
Água no rio é boa.
Yes, the water from the river is good.
Okay, there hasn't been any contamination to the environment by the company?
Não, água ainda não.
Other promise is that those, because not only the fishermen have been damaged with this situation, because apart from the fishermen, there are those indirect activities. Women who were catching fish from the margin of the sea, and other small fishermen who stay and doing their activities only in that first part of the sea, they would be also compensated. But it's only a few amount of people that received that compensations, meaning people that who doesn't have boats but were working with fisheries.
Okay.
Because our government always
Pode vir dar o exemplo, os nossos
inform.
Moçambique foram reassentados no sítio X,
they come and inform that people in Mozambique have been resettled and now they have good conditions of life.
Enquanto que a vida não é boa.
While the life is not good,
Mesmo nós em Palma,
even us in Palma,
éramos dito que os nossos
we have
colegas
been
de
told
eles
that
estão a
our
chorar,
colleagues from Tete that are crying in this meeting, that they had a good life.
Na altura nós éramos de sermos reassentados.
In that time, it was before our resettlement, they were giving us the example of Tete.
Então as organizações da sociedade civil,
So the civil society organizations brought us a colleague from Tete,
E nós também fomos a Tete.
and we also went to Tete.
Nós agora estamos aqui no encontro cada vez mais.
And now we are in this meeting with our colleagues from Tete.
Estamos a ver que tudo é falso.
We are seeing that everything was false.
The main beneficiaries of the disinformation campaign are those spreading it, corrupt government officials, Total Energies, and other foreign investors. We'll unpack this further in the next episode, where we look into the politics and power behind fossil fuels for development projects and the roles that they play. This campaign is also not true because evidence shows that fossil fuels do not lead to development across the African continent, even in the best of cases. In the case of Mozambique, it's been 14 years since gas was discovered. Since then, not only is there no evidence of development, but rather there's evidence of Mozambique being in a worse position with worse debt, higher inequality, higher unemployment, increased poverty, and astronomically higher prices on all commodities. We've seen this repeatedly in Angola and Nigeria with crude oil, and even in Mozambique in Montepuez, in the second largest city in Cabo Delgado. Yet, the belief still persists. In the next episode, we look at the role of politics and power in advancing the message that fossil fuels will develop Africa, particularly their role in advancing LNG extraction as a development pathway for Mozambique. And we close this episode with a call to action from Baba Masood.
I would like that our colleague from Botswana take this message to the world, to Botswana and to the world, for them to know what is happening in Mozambique.
Let's answer this call to action by sharing this episode far and wide on your social media, with friends, and with family. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Sustain267 Podcast. Find a list of the sources used for this episode in the show notes. Don't forget to subscribe to Sustain267 Podcast channel on the platform you're listening on, so you are the first to know when the next episode drops. I am the host of Sustain267 Podcast, Pato Kelesitse. The sound engineer is Maleho Makoti. Let's connect on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram on our handle at Sustain267 and continue the conversation. This series is part of my work as a Bertha Foundation Fellow, hosted by the Botswana Society for Human Development. Take care.
Sustain267.